Hello and welcome to this painting tutorial, where today I'll be looking at how to paint the Necron monolith. As well as being an iconic model in its own right, the monolith exhibits many of those classic Necron design features, oily black metal and glowing green orbs, and in this video I'll be focusing special attention on these elements, so this video will hopefully be useful for those of you painting anything Necron related. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started. As you can see, I've broken the model down into sub-assemblies for ease of painting, and I'll put it all together when I'm finished. I've left the walls and corners of the pyramid structure and the inner workings separate. I've also left the Death Rays, Eternity Gate, and Scorpion detached for now. It would just be impossible to access some of these areas if the model was fully assembled before painting. With all the sub-assemblies done, I'm going to prime everything with Chaos Black Spray. The first areas I'm going to look at are the oily living black metal and the glowing green stone that cover the majority of this model, as demonstrated by these two parts here that I've painted as a test. I'm going to start with the innermost area, the green stone, which has some small areas, for example at the top of the capstones there, but is mostly seen on the 4 pylons within the monolith, and also on things like the Eternity Gate. To begin, I'm simply going to base coat all of these areas with Incubi Darkness, using a large base brush. Work it into all the nooks and crannies and keep your paint thin, but over black this will probably need multiple coats to achieve a strong, even colour. With that dry, I'm going to panel line everything with black templar contrast using a fine brush. This will define the individual blocks of stone and also add some definition and contrast. It doesn't matter if you get a little onto the stone surface here like I have, as we'll be highlighting up all of these areas. Don't forget to also define the rougher blocks at the base. I'm also going to do the same thing on the Eternity Gate, defining the connections between the blocks, the inscriptions, and also the slabs on the steps. I'm now going to start highlighting, firstly with a dry brush of Cabalite Green all over the surfaces. This will start to pick out the shapes and textures and brighten the overall stone colour. With an equal parts mix of Cabalite Green and Gauss Blaster Green, I'm then going to do a lighter dry brush to start picking out more of the extreme raised edges. And finally, a very light dry brush with pure Gauss Blaster Green. You can see how that really now picks out all the sharp edges of the rock. Don't forget to also do these steps with the Eternity Gate. I'm finally going to take Gauss Blaster Green and apply this as a spot highlight to all the corners of the blocks and panels, drawing the eye to these most extreme edges and giving the stone an almost glowing feel. This step is quite tedious, but it's definitely worth it. Now we have our green stone, but I want to push the contrast between dark and light a little further. So, returning to Incubi Darkness, I'm going to thin this and paint it into the centre of each panel. I'm then going to do the same thing with Coelia greenshade, just in the very centre of each panel. And with that, the green stone is complete. I'm now going to turn to the oily, living black exterior of the monolith, as demonstrated by these two sections here. I'm going to paint this colour over the central vents, the walls, and also this area of the exterior with the scorpion. I'll demonstrate on this one wall section. I'm going to start with a heavy overbrush of Eshin grey, kind of like a dry brush but with a slightly damper brush. This will catch the raised areas but also leave a streaky, oily finish. Then, a lighter dry brush with Dawnstone to start picking out the edges and shapes. And finally, a very light dry brush with Blue Horror, defining the sharpest edges of the metal and giving us a slightly cool blue tone. Finally, as with the green stone, I'm also going to apply Blue Horror more emphatically on all the edges and corners as a spot highlight, and also use this to define any pits and dents in the metal. Now to add some more visual interest and contrast, I'm going to take some diluted Scrag Brown and run this into select recesses to create a rusty effect. Diluting the paint this way will help it to run where we want it to go. Just work your way around. It doesn't need to be in every crevice, a little goes a long way here, but this will really contrast with the black and make the metal pop. And with that done, a significant amount of the monolith is finished. You can see I've painted all the exterior walls and the inner pylons. Notice the green stone on the capstones of the outer walls too. You can see here I've painted some of the orbs and metal as a test, and we'll get onto those in a moment. I've also painted the inner engine in black and green too. I'm now going to move on to the metal, all of the cables like here connecting the pieces, but also the capstones, the metal panels and vents on the outer walls, basically all of the engine work. I use a few different tones of metal across the model, but for all the metal I'm still going to begin the same way, with a base coat of iron hand steel. Work your way around the model, picking out every area that you want to be metal. Also, don't forget to paint the guns. With that done, we have all the metal base coated. As you can see, some of these areas are actually going to be copper, but I'm going to start with the oily steel colour, which I'm going to shade with my favourite recipe of 1 part Garraghak sewer to 3 part contrast medium. If you've watched any of my videos before, you'll know how much I love this paint for shading metal. It's just a fantastic, oily, brown-black colour. Just work your way around, covering everything you want to be iron. For the scorpion, I'm going to eventually paint the actual body copper, but the tail here also gets a coat of this paint. I'm also going to cover the exhausts. Now, as I said, I'm painting the body of the scorpion copper, but I'm also going to paint the capstones, the spikes on the death rays, and parts of the body copper too. For these areas, I'm going to go over them with Canoptek alloy. Now the reason I painted these with Iron Hand steel first is to give a lighter base coat than black, but even so you may find you need multiple coats. I'm then going to shade all of these areas with Seraphim Sepia, giving us a lovely warm, aged feel to the copper. I'm now going to start pushing the shade a little further. With Gullum and Flesh contrast, I'm going to paint the lower half of the capstones, creating a gradient from top to bottom. I'm then going to take a clean brush and just feather out the paint to create a smoother transition. I'm going to show you the same thing here on the Scorpion, starting to make the bottom half of the body panels darker than the top. Just work your way around one section at a time, applying the paint and then feathering out the join with a clean brush. I'm now going to apply a second layer of Gullum and Flesh in the same way, covering a slightly smaller area and focusing more towards the bottom. And feather it out similarly. Don't forget the guns at this point too. Finally, I'm going to use Fyreslayer Flesh as a recess shade, defining the deepest recesses and panel lines. Just one last metal area to prepare, and that's the Scorpion's legs. I'm going to base coat these with Screaming Bell. And I'm also going to use Screaming Bell to paint the outer casing of the Scorpion's weapons. I'm then going to shade these areas with Carroburg Crimson, and then recess shade with Drakenhof Nightshade, picking out between the segments and the deepest panel lines. Now, you'll notice I haven't highlighted any of the metals yet, and that's because all of the metal is going to be highlighted in exactly the same way. Buckle in, because this step is going to take a while. With Stormhost Silver, I'm going to edge highlight everything, and I mean everything. The edges of the copper capstones, the steel cables, the edges of all the guns, and there are a lot of those. The body of the Scorpion. You can turn the model to get a sharper edge highlight, running your brush perpendicular to the edges. Yep, we're still going. and all of the tail ridges. At this point, if you haven't already tuned out, please do like this video and consider subscribing if you haven't already for more tips and easy painting recipes. Last thing to do with the metal is to make the exhausts feel really blackened and sooty. I'm going to paint the bottoms with Nuln oil, also getting it into all the nooks and crannies inside the exhausts. I'm then going to take a clean brush and just feather the edges like we did earlier. You can apply multiple coats to really build up the black colour if you want. I think I'll end up doing 2 or 3. And then with black Templar contrast, I'm going to paint inside the exhausts themselves where the build-up would be heaviest. Phew! If you're still with me, well done, that was a Herculean effort. But we've really painted the majority of the model by this point. And at least highlighting everything metal in one colour is a bit quicker than multiple techniques. I'm now going to turn to the largest remaining area, all of the glowing orbs. Paint these with Corax white to give us a bright base to work from. I'm also going to paint this into the death rays, making sure to get a little on the edges of the individual metal sections, like so. Then, turning to every Necron player's best friend, Tesseract Glow, simply paint this over all the areas we just base coated, for a simple, luminescent green. For the smaller orbs, I'm going to highlight these with an equal parts mix of Tesseract Glow and Corax White to pick out the white, bright centres. And also do the same on the death rays, first painting the white areas with Tesseract Glow and getting it up onto the metal edges to indicate a simple OSL. I'm then going to define these slightly more by painting Mantis Warrior's Green as a panel line wash, to give this sense of inner depth to the glowing green. Finally, I'm going to edge highlight the green areas with this equal parts mix of Tesseract Glow and Corax White, where it would be brightest. Now, this simple approach works for the smaller orbs, but quite a few of them are larger and so require a bit more attention. It's the same approach as for the smaller gems, but just with some more intermediate stages. We'll begin by base coating all of the larger orbs the same way, and then coating them with Tesseract Glow. But then, rather than moving straight to a 1-to-1 mix, slowly start adding a little Corax White in and build up highlights, focusing further and further towards the centre each time to build up a gradual gradient. And finally, dot highlight the very centre with Corax White. And then recess shade with Mantis Warrior's Green as before. Now this same approach works on orbs of any size, it's just that the larger the surface, the more gradual you want the buildup of white to be. Now, for the orbs on the underbelly of the Scorpion, I've cheated slightly, and just painted Tesseract Glow straight over the metal, as these areas aren't really visible when the model is finished. I've also done this cheat method on the orbs of the Death Rays, which are similarly concealed in the finished model. I'm now going to turn to the Necron warrior appearing through the Eternity Gate. As you can see, I've painted his gun using the same techniques for glowing green, black, and metal as before, and I've base coated the lightning with Corax white. For the warrior himself, I'm going to base coat him with Iron Hand Steel. I'm then going to shade his inner joints with my Garraghak Sewer contrast medium mix from before. I'm going to shade all over the metal skin with Guilliman Flesh. And then exactly like I did for the copper earlier, I'm going to apply a second layer focusing towards the bottom half of each panel. And finally, I'm going to paint Fyreslayer flesh on the very darkest areas, again like before, just to give us this really striking gradient. Finally, I'm going to edge highlight the whole warrior with Stormhost Silver, focusing more towards the tops of the outer body panels. Returning to Corax White, I'm going to paint inside the eye sockets and chest of the warrior as if he's glowing from within. I'm then going to cover all of the white areas with Tesseract Glow exactly as for the orbs. Now, at this point, we're going to thin some Mantis Warrior's green with equal parts contrast medium, and start painting this towards the edges of the lightning, away from the centre, because we want the finished effect to be brighter in the middle. Take a second layer and apply this over the first, focusing even further towards the edges than last time. And finally, with undiluted Mantis Warriors green, cover an even smaller area towards the edges of the lightning. We can also recess shade this into the Necron's body and eyes, and between any of the apparition cubes. Next, gradually adding in Corax white to the Tesseract glow like before, I'm going to start highlighting the lightning exactly like with the larger orbs, getting increasingly towards the centre and covering a smaller area with each brighter layer to build up this glowing, crackling energy effect. For the final highlight, just pick out the very tips. The edges of any of the apparition cubes, and also the eyeballs. And with that done, our lightning effect is complete. Now time to assemble. Just one thing left to paint, the big old ball on top of the monolith. Base coat it with Tesseract glow exactly like before. Now, we're going to build up gradual shading with our diluted Mantis Warriors green from earlier. Pick a line on the prisms and paint up to that point, leaving beyond it unshaded. Then, one row down, paint a second layer. The idea is that we're going to let the angular sides of the ball do the work for us, and gradually make the shade darker working downwards. When you're happy with how much you've built up the effect, dry brush the ball with an equal parts mix of Corax white, Tesseract glow to pick out the edges, and finally spot highlight each intersection with a 1 to 2 mix of the two paints. And once that's done, our monolith is finally complete. This model was an absolute joy to paint, full of some of those classic Necron features. I really love that mixture of black, green and warm copper, and it's really inspired me to paint some more Necrons going forwards. Now, if you'll forgive me a brief plug, if you're watching this video in 2025, you can see this model on display at my new exhibition Making Egypt at Young V&A in Bethnal Green, London. And if you're watching it in the future, you can see the model forever right here on this video. I really hope you enjoyed watching, and can find some useful techniques here for painting your own models. As always, please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments down below what you did or didn't like. and I'll see you next time. Until then, happy painting.